welcome. This Formations event is with writer Pemi Aguda. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to Pemi Aguda and to hear her read from her work. I read her short story Breast Milk, which was published in the very innovative One Story Press format in 2021, and is now published in a second version in her debut collection of short stories, Ghostroots. Pemi Aguda is from Lagos, Nigeria. She has an MFA from the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. Her writing has been published in Granta, Zoetrope, Ploughshares, and One Story, among others, and has won the O. Henry Prizes. Her novel In Progress won the 2020 Deborah Rogers Foundation Writers Award, and she's the current Hortense Spillers Assistant Editor at Transition magazine. Ghostroots, a finalist for the 2024 National Book Award in Fiction, is her first book. Today, we're very lucky to be able to hear Pemi Aguda reading from and talking about her stories in Ghostroots. I'm delighted to welcome Pemi Aguda, who will read and discuss her work before I join her for questions and conversation. Thank you very much for being here, Pemi, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So what's going to happen is that I will read from two short stories. I'll read excerpts from two short stories, and I will preface them a little bit talking about my inspirations. And I will start with Breast Milk. So Breast Milk is a short story I wrote in, I think, 2018. What happened was that I went to a lecture given by the poet and anthropologist. Her name is Ruth Behar at the University of Michigan. And at this lecture, Ruth spoke about her travels. And on one of these travels, she had met a woman who had lost all her babies. And she told Ruth Behar that she thinks that she had lost all her babies because there was too much rage in her breast milk. And that image kind of stuck with me, the idea that an emotion could be so powerful to have such strong physical ramifications. So that stayed with me. It's just the idea that our bodies can absorb mental unrest this way, but for her to state it so starkly, she was so sure that this is what caused her babies to die, that stayed with me. And at the time, there were a lot of conversations in my life on Nigerian Twitter, actually, about feminisms and the different ways that they manifest in the space of the privacy of a home, especially in the Nigerian context. So the meeting of these reflections was kind of how Breast Milk came to be. So now I will read a little bit from Breast Milk. The warm, slimy creature that is my son is placed in my arms. He is crying a grating, lusty soprano. I stretch my mouth into the likeness of a smile. I don't look down at the baby. I hold him loosely, too tight, and he might squirt out of my grip and ricochet off the white walls of my hospital room. We're going to cut the cord now, Mommy, one of the nurses says, and I nod. She says, Mommy, in that patronizing tone I use when I tell my cousin's children that they are so big and tall and grown now. Can I sit? Timmy asks. I don't hear what they say to him, how these efficient women tell him no. But I see him step back, his head lowered as if he's been chastised. I could have told him that this is not one of those new age hospitals that allow men to actively participate in the birth, that the father is merely a bystander here, a witness. But I didn't. There are many things I don't say to my husband. The baby is taken from me so he can be cleaned, so I can be cleaned too. Through the haze of 12-hour labor pains, I watch my husband reach out to receive our baby from the nurse, now swaddled in the ewedu-colored cloth we bought. I am tired. My gritty eyes want to close against the wall, and my aching body wants to gather its leaking, melting shape into itself so I can recover from all the pushing and groaning and bloody catastrophes of childbirth. But I want to watch Timmy's first moments of fatherhood. His body is stiff. In the practice hole they taught us in prenatal classes, baby's neck in the crook of your elbow, the other hand supporting the rest of the weight. He swings his head towards me, the only part of his body he releases from this wooden stance that proclaims fierce responsibility and a dash of pride, and smiles. Through mine, I see the sheen of his tears. I turn away and settle back into the pillow. In the morning, my mother shows up. She's telling me that she came as soon as she could, that my father will be proud of this feat of mine, bringing new life into the world. And am I glad? Am I relieved? Am I fine? Am I proud? I'm excused from responding to her barrage because I am a woman who just had a baby, an exhausted woman who endured earth-shifting contractions, who thrashed through a forest of clawing pain, whose pelvic region throbs as if pounded by a pestle. My mother doesn't sit. She hovers above me, tucking a braid away, stroking my cheek. A nurse comes to save me from my mother's goodwill, pawing. Da Silva? Her uniform is so white, her waist so small, she looks like a cardboard cutout, this nurse. She also looks faintly like someone I have seen on Timmy's Facebook when I hit load more so that the life he had before me appears in grainy, frozen laughter with strangers. Why do some Nigerian hospitals insist on these silly white caps for their nurses? Her cap looks like a diamond-less tiara tucked into her afro bun. Yes, my mother answers for me. This is her. There are many times I wish my mother would be present to speak for me with her impassioned activist voice, like the night Timmy confessed his affair 38 weeks ago. But am I not an adult? Your baby is scheduled to receive formula again in 30 minutes, the nurse says, but I came to see if there are any changes, any thick liquid, clear, yellow. As she reaches for the neck of my hospital gown, I catch her wrist. Her face rearranges itself in surprise, and I think she isn't that pretty. Her eyes are too close together. There's no change, I say. She twists free and brushes the rescued limb against the front of her dress, as if to restore composure. Okay, but I still need to take a look, Mrs. Da Silva. Ms., my mother corrects, Ms. What does Mrs. really mean? Is a question I grew up hearing my mother pose to people who could only stutter in response. The nurse's frown deepens. She's unsettled by this interaction with me and my mother. I'm sorry, Ms. Da Silva. Your son isn't pooping as much as we'd like. He's okay, but to be safe, I'm going to have to feel around for colostrum, milk. That's all I did last night while Timmy slept in a chair beside me. I prodded and tugged and massaged, but my breasts have stayed swollen to unfamiliar D cups, nipples stubbornly dry. They told me milk or something like it would come a few months into pregnancy or around birth. I said there's nothing. I jerked the top of the gray sack of a gown they have put me in. I turn away from the nurse's unpretty face to my mother's, which is now contemplating me with a frown. Timmy holds my hand, and my mother caresses my shoulder while cradling our baby in one elbow. Another day has passed, and the doctor is asking questions before discharging us. I hang limp in Timmy's clasp. His palms are always so dry. How do I trust a man whose sweat glands won't betray him? His palms were dry then too when he stroked my arm and informed me he was going to Abuja for business. Just business. But should this man trust his wife, who claims she forgives his affair, who pardons his cheating so easily, a wife who says everything is forgotten and buried, a wife who kisses those dry palms the morning after his confession and says, "We're good, babe"? Should he trust this woman if she doesn't believe the truth of her own forgiveness? I wriggle free from Timmy's hold and reach for the baby we have not yet named. We have 2 more days till the naming ceremony. My mother lowers him into my arms. Don't worry about lactating, the doctor is saying. I don't want you to worry at all. Lactation happens late for some women, others not at all. Some women even say breastfeeding is old-fashioned, but everything is fine as long as baby is loving the delicious formula. I want to ask the doctor how he knows the formula is delicious, if it is more delicious than breast milk, if the baby can tell the difference. When we saw the baby's penis for the first time, pointed out to us in the jumble that is an ultrasound, the nurse gave a practice chuckle. "See how he's proud of that penis," she said. Timmy's eyes liquefied. I turned away from him and away from his son's penis to look at the fetal growth chart on the wall. A son? My heart broke a little. A son who could grow up to become a man who might hurt other people no matter how well I raise him, because a man is a man even when he is the best man, as Timmy has shown me. I gathered myself and turned back to smile at the monitor. Maybe it started there, my body's rejection of my child, visiting the sins of father on son. I lower my head to blow air into my baby's face, my mouth a soft O. My smile is not forced when he wrinkles his face and blinks at me. If you want to see our lactation consultant, the doctor adds, you're welcome to do so. He's not in-house, though well recommended. Give it some time, I'd say. Baby is fine, poop is fine, all is fine. The doctor has 3 horizontal tribal marks on each cheek that squirm when he speaks. My baby's cheeks look extra smooth in comparison. I press my lips to that smoothness. Timmy beams at this picture and asks if I'm ready to go home. All our family members come out for the naming ceremony. Their voices ring loud as they celebrate me, celebrate Timmy, a first child, a son. Someone has dropped a thick white envelope into my lap. For my hard work, they say. I let the insulting thing slide off. Timmy strolls around in his agbada made from the matching Guinea brocade his mother bought for us, a baby blue shade of sky we haven't seen since Harmattan started. He stops to laugh at someone's joke, the cloth billowing around him, so natural, so man, so Timmy. He has been cradling our baby all day as if eager to show off how modern he is, a rare Nigerian man who allowed his wife to keep her mother's name, a man who will be involved in the care of his child. I want to yank the baby from him, but I do not have the right. The one bond that ties baby to mother, at least for the first year, is missing. My breasts oppress me with their emptiness. We name him Fikayo. We call him Fi, Olu Fikayo. All the names I suggested were Finn, Fenton, Fran, because my love of F names had lingered from devouring all that angsty British literature when I was a teenager. But Timmy reminded me that we are Yoruba, not English, and the name should reflect that. Is there a Yoruba name for this child was conceived in the throes of hurt and anger? An Ego name for this boy is a result of your forgiveness sex after your husband confessed his wrong. I acquiesced easily to his sensible argument about the names, remembering how he had quietly rebutted my reservations about becoming his girlfriend 6 years ago, an elevation from a casual fling. Come on, we have the same views on the important things, Aduke, he said. That's what's important, Nitori Oloro. That's a foundation not many folks have. Timmy's mother's pastor calls out the names Olufikayo, Olujimi, Olatunde. The people cheer and toast with glasses of wine and zobo under the canopy we rented for the day. When the robed pastor dabs anointing oil on Fikayo's head, the baby begins to cry. I jump up to snatch him. He's hungry, I murmur to no one in particular, and retreat into the house. I heard music pick up behind me, Sonny Ade blasting from the rented speakers, my cousin's children screaming at each other, Timmy's mother shouting for the caterer to start serving small chops. The woman's Christian benevolence is what prevents friction between her and my mother, between me and her, between her and Timmy. Love thy neighbor as thyself, she mutters to herself frequently, like a calming mantra, shrugging in acceptance even when she doesn't understand why her son is acting like a woman, doing household chores and sharing the financial decision-making with me. The microphone screeches and I close the nursery door behind me, but the door is not thick enough to drown them out. One of my aunties has tied my earrobe for me, insisting that the tighter the wrapper, the faster my pregnancy pouch will shrink. I release my belly now and flop down into the armchair. I shift feet in my arms and draw the diaper bag closer with a foot. It is an awkward process. I haven't when the nib fills his mouth, and I'm envious of a plastic bottle. My aunt finds me dozing off while Fee feeds. Feeding bottle care. Her gele is maroon and silver, and the light from the window reflects against the scaly material. I squint and look down at Fee. He has fallen asleep. Auntie, I say, but Kilode, why are you not breastfeeding? She crosses her arms under her own breasts. Deyemi's wife had the nerve to tell me she was not breastfeeding so her breast won't sag. Sag? You too, Aduke. Does your mother know about this decision? Auntie, I check to make sure Fee is still sleeping and lower my voice. There is no milk, Auntie. I have begun to cry. My aunt's face relaxes. She moves to pick Fee up, places him in his cot. She leans forward then as if to hug me. I know what to do. Jumoke had the same problem, but you should see her now. The baby girl is 3 and we're begging her to stop. I will send you one agbo that my sister makes in Ijebu. You will rub it like. She reaches for my breasts, through the baby blue brocade, through my bra, and begins to knead. I feel myself leaving my body through a frustrated sigh, floating to the ceiling of the lilac nursery with the white silhouettes above my own gele, above my auntie's gele. which dips forward in rhythm with her hands above my body, above my shame. Our friends visit with gifts that are non-newborn baby appropriate. Only Sandra, who writes an annoyingly wholehearted, wholesome mommy blog with a large readership, shows up without a hard-edged toy, but she also brings along a pious look to throw at the feeding bottle and formulas. If I were to check, I would probably find an irate blog post railing against them. When he catches a glance, Timmy tells Sandra that I need to rest. The others bring laughter and warmth and kisses for Fee, but I am grateful when I walk the last person out of the front door and return to the silence of our living room. Timmy is sitting on the edge of an armchair, and I know he wants to speak with me. I grab a bib from the floor and head to the nursery to my baby to hide. Aduke. I turn to look at my husband, his wide nose, the Cupid's bow that would fight Rihanna's for perfection. The first time I kissed him, I let my tongue trace that dip, recarving it with my lust. Are you okay? He asks now. Yeah. Why? You've been kind of distant. What I should say is, I don't care about your stupid ex. I care that I don't know how to be angry about her. What I say instead is, we just had a baby, Timmy. Have you read any of Sandra's articles about motherhood? The laugh that punctuates my sentence is a weak sputter. Timmy points at me, then at himself. We're okay. He wants my eyes to meet his. I hear it in his question. They meet. Mine skitter away. We're great, I say. I look down to find my baby's bib crumpled in my fist. I straighten out the butterflies on soft white cotton, blue and orange and pink. I'm just tired, you know. But I look up, afraid he will say that I am not even breastfeeding, that he will ask me what is making me tired. You don't even let me help with Fikayo. You're always sleeping in the damn nursery. This wasn't our plan, Aduke. Of course, Timmy is not insensitive. He rises right along with me when Fee cries us awake. I keep shushing him away back to sleep, away from the surgery. I just feel a bit guilty about the breast milk thing. Maybe I'm overcompensating. I push the fiction out of my lungs easily. Back in Sunday school, where my mother used to send me before she decided religion hated women, the teacher would pipe, to err is human, to forgive is divine, even if we kids didn't know what it meant to err. Now that Timmy has shown me what it means, the really taunts me. If to forgive is divine, why am I resisting my own divinity? I want to feel the righteousness that comes with forgiving infidelity, but all I feel is shame at my lack of backbone, my lack of indignation, and fear that if it happens again, I will just as easily forgive Timmy. My husband is good, has been good. This was a fluke, and he confessed immediately because he knew that I would want to know immediately, and he was sorry, and he is sorry every day, and I could see him hurting because he knew he had hurt me, and he's so very sorry, sorry in a way that I believe. Am I even my mother's daughter to be thinking about forgiveness? Now Timmy is asking if I think this is postpartum depression. I'm not depressed, just tired. Come back to bed, he begs. I miss you. I flinch. God, I'm not talking about sex. I'm not a monster. I raise both hands in surrender. Yeah, we can move his cot to our room tomorrow. How about that? When Timmy lets out a dissatisfied breath, covering his face, its beautiful features, with his hands, I flee into the nursery, closing the door behind me. That is only wood, not metal, not thick enough to protect me. But why do I need protection? Why shouldn't he be seeking protection from me? I want to be the type of woman who would have turned into a pillar of flames when Timmy told me about sex with the ex in Abuja. I want to have singed the confession of his tongue until the smell of his own burning choked him, robbing him of oxygen till he was flat on his face at my feet, melting in my fury. I want to be a woman like my mother. There are YouTube videos of my mother cutting down the governor at a rally organized by her non-profits for women's development. The governor had said she should leave politics to men. Don't you dare, Mr. Olusegun Adetola, my mother screamed, spittle gathering in the corner of her ruby wool-painted lips. Don't you dare belittle the women who carry this society. We carry it. But no, I went straight into his arms. Mine was a faltering anger, here, then gone. My mother would be disgusted to see the weakness in her spawn. And I'll stop there for breast milk. Next, I'll read contributions, and I can read this one all in its entirety because it's only 4 pages long. It's a short story about an informal money cooperative called Isusu. And this was inspired, I guess, by my own mother, who belonged in past tense to a small situation like this. And I remember being so stressed because our attitudes towards risk are very different. And so while she was a businesswoman who believes like high risk meant high reward, I was more conservative about how much one should commit to these systems. And so when I went to Clarion Workshop, which is a speculative fiction out of UCSD in San Diego, the idea was to write a short story every week, and we all had to, it was very intense. It was 6 weeks. Everybody had to write a short story, and we all workshopped those stories together. But going in, I knew that I wanted to write about this system of contributions. I knew I wanted to do something about this system of taking and receiving, and the ways that small-scale communities like this can sometimes end up reflecting just the bigger institutions that we are running away from. And so this is contributions. We have been practicing esusu for a long time. Our mothers did it, our mothers' mothers did it, and probably their own mothers too. We've never had a problem of this kind before, nothing so significant before this woman showed up, nothing we couldn't fix anyway. This is how our system works. Each woman has 1 month to contribute a certain amount of naira. Our names are on a list, and when that month is over, whoever's number one takes it all. Then the contributions begin again. And at the end of the second month, number two collects. The names are always in random order. We go down the list until the last person has collected, then reset. This works for us. We don't need your banks. We don't need your loans. We can take care of ourselves. Things aren't always smooth. There was a time Iya Ibeji wasted her collection on a trip to Dubai, camel rides and shopping, and then couldn't make her contribution the next month. We had to seize her frozen food store's generator until she came up with the money. We're not wicked people, you must understand, but for this system to work, there has to be order. Another time, Mrs. B had to pay hospital bills for her son's operation. If we show pity even once, our structure will collapse on itself. So we seized Mrs. B's daughter. The daughter made meals for us. She carried our bags when we went to the market, relieving us of some burdens. She rubbed our feet and plaited our hair. When Mrs. B raised the money, we sent her daughter back home. We still have fond memories of the girl, her sweet face, her spicy beef stew, the way she sprang lightly from foot to foot as if her bones were made of paper. Ours is a small group. We must be for trust, for reliability. Not just anyone will accept our terms of admittance, both lifelong and strict. We take what we can until your obligations are met. And for many, this is too much power, too much risk. We haven't invited you here, we tell the ones who balk at our terms, their heads tilted at beseeching angles. Go try your luck at the banks. We've worked too hard to allow any stupid leniency that could risk sending us back to the gutters. So when the new woman came sniffing at our meetings with her long nose, we warned her. We asked if she was certain. Yes, she said. She needed an alternative to the banks. Yes, she said she was sure. She was a cousin to one of our brother's best friends. So we said okay, even if we were hesitant. Our hands fiddling with wrappers, our chests tight. We welcomed her. At first, things went smoothly. Nonsense hardly ever shows itself immediately. She paid her contributions on time. She came to the meetings and drank Fanta and ate chin-chin with us. She weighed in on decisions like what color to wear to Sisi Oge's daughter's wedding, pink or burgundy, and whether we should collectively stop patronizing Nature's Way Spa because the owner elbowed one of us on the way to get communion at church. But by the 4th month, she started leaving texts on our phones, begging for more time. Look, it doesn't work this way. We appraised her life, checking for what we could seize, what we could take from her so she would understand the gravity of this commitment. We found nothing except a husband and an old mother in the village. We seized the husband. Alas, he was useless around our homes. He sat with our husbands, his big beer belly and their big beer bellies all shuddering gelatinously in mirth at some distasteful joke. Her husband screamed at football games with ours, played table tennis in our gardens, whooping like a fool whenever the ball thwacked against the paddle in his hand. Sometimes he looked at us. He looked at us and reminded us of the expanse of our hips, the heft of our breasts, reminded us of the ways our bodies take up space. We returned the husband and still she couldn't pay her contribution, so we seized her mother. Her mother was no better. The old woman sat brooding in corners, her eyes bulging out at us as we picked beans or sewed a button on. She blended in with the cobwebs, her skin acquiring a dark fuzz, a gleaming scaliness, exploiting the shifting shadows. And when she eventually turned into a frog, and then a lizard, and then a cat, our children squealed in delight. But when they tried to pet the cats, she scratched their hands, drawing blood, leaving scars in the shapes of a strange language. She leaped away from our punishing arms to perch high above our heads, and we craned our necks to look at her, envying the fluffy agility, the way she could wrangle her body into a smaller, lighter version of itself, stealthy and wily and out of reach. We sent the mother away and called the woman in. What else could she give us to hold on to until she could make her contribution? We sat her in the center of the group so she could feel our glares prick her skin from every direction, feel the pressure of our disappointment. Look, she said, will you take my arms? Her arms were long and muscular and had known work. We accepted them. They were useful in our kitchens, these arms, chopping ugulis here and stirring a pot of ewedu there, pounding yams, slicing apples. They were useful in the household, sweeping dust down the corridor and rocking a child to sleep. Sometimes the arms wrapped around us when our husbands were yelling, or when the children were crying again, or when the sky looked the wrong shade of blue. But still, she couldn't make her contribution, so we held on to her arms. My legs, she asked, when the next month she still couldn't pay. She sat, armless, collapsed boba sleeves at her sides. In the middle of the circle, her head bowed so that her braids hid her face from her questioning eyes. We had never seen such ineptitude before, such resignation to humiliation. But her legs were sturdy, with firm calves that could kick a football with her sons, and strong knees that braced their daughters' heads when we plaited their hair, and a lap that received our heads when we wept because the sky was still the wrong shade of blue, and our eyeballs felt heavy in our heads. My torso, she offered. My head, she contributed. Her voice got area with each new part given. And what use were these breasts, this stomach, this heavy head filled with skull? But we took, and we took, and we took. It wasn't until we had all her body parts that we saw what she had done. Had we too not always wanted to shed our parts, be lighter, be nothing, be free? Would we also not give anything to have our bodies no longer belong to us? Now we do not speak about it because we are too ashamed to acknowledge how she deceived us into carrying her, bearing her weight forever, her sinew and bones and teeth and muscle and breath and blood. We avoid each other's eyes as we discuss contributions and collections. When we shuffle out of meetings, our shoulders hunch, our treads drag from the burden of her, from carrying what we have taken. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be able to hear you read those two stories. I've got loads of questions, but we might not get through all of them. But there's so much I'd love to ask you about your collection and about your work and your ambitions. Perhaps first of all, I'll ask a question about the title of the collection, Ghostroots. And I was really interested in this because most collections of short stories simply take one of the short story titles and use that as the collection, and you've decided not to do that, and I think that's fascinating. I think it kind of implies that the stories are all connected together in different ways, and that they have a common concern. So I wondered how you decided on the title and whether you could talk about what you wanted to convey by it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was doing my MFA in grad school, my thesis advisor, so there was a version of this book that I had submitted for thesis. Not all the stories are the same, and some of them have been more developed since then. But at the time, one of the assignments that my thesis advisor had given was to think about a title for the collection that didn't just take one of the stories' names. And the idea behind that was to do the work of thinking about the ways that the stories are connected in ways that might not seem obvious to me at first. And so with a collection, right, you write each story individually. And when I'm working on an individual story, I'm not necessarily thinking about a collection or the expanse of what the stories are doing together. But then in hindsight, I started to realize that I actually did have preoccupations that echoed in different stories. And one of those things was just family and roots, right? So the ways that family can feel both constraining and grounding, right? And so that was what I was working with. And some of them, I guess, had been described about ghost stories. And part of what I was thinking about is ancestry, especially the ancestry that we might not be aware of intellectually, but who are somehow with us, like present in us in some, I've heard people tell me how they haven't met their grandparents or their great-grandparents, and then one day a family member says, oh, you do this exactly the same way that person would have done. So there are ways in which our present tense is defined by these ghosts, these people who had come before us, and this haunting is both positive and negative, and that's the way I think I came down to Ghostroots. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. Fascinating. I really love the short story form, so I wanted to ask a little bit about that. I think the short story has that kind of emotional and symbolic power of poetry, but that world building potential of the novel form. So I really love it. I think it has so much that it can give, it can do. And I wondered if you could talk about what attracts you to the form, what makes it a good fit for the things that you want to write about.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It's interesting you think it's has any relations to poetry, because I think poetry is so hard, because how do people put so much in one sentence? I'm always blown away by the poets. But I've always written short stories. In fact, that for a long time I only considered myself a short story writer. When I was younger, when I was I think 21 or 22, I was part of um, a website that was relatively popular in Nigeria for like younger people, where I had been asked to write a short story week. So I had a fiction column, and I would have to write a short story every week. Every Tuesday it was published. And what was wonderful about it was that so it was short enough that people would read it really quickly, but then everybody engaged with these stories in a very interesting way. They acted as if the characters of these stories were real people that they knew. They weren't necessarily interested in the craft. They were more interested in the actions that these people had taken. And so some of the comments would be like, why did Jumoke do that? Why did X do that? And I don't know, I loved that engagement. But I think to evoke that kind of reaction was probably a combination of the length of the story and then what I decided to focus on. And that's what I love about a short story. It feels like a really short immersion, like you can dunk yourself into something and step out of it. Whereas a novel feels like a more sustained steeping. Like since I've written this collection, I now have a novel draft that is being edited right now, and it's very different for me anyway. There's just something so wide and amorphous about the scope of a novel that a short story just allows us to have these nice constraints. And I think there's a lot of wonderful things that can happen within the constraints of a short story.
Yeah. I loved all of the stories in Ghostroots and I read it avidly. But I think the one that I always think back to, apart from breast milk, which I will ask you about in a moment, is Masquerade Season. It really kind of haunted me. And I think I'm going to give you my kind of brief summary of what I think of it. I think it's really innovative to write from this new perspective, a story about the difficulty of growing up and kind of abandoning the magical possibilities of childhood. That's what it felt like a bit to me. And I think it's interesting because it comes from a boy's perspective, or it's about a boy as a protagonist, because boys' coming of age stories tend to focus on things like the development of physical strength and kind of defensiveness or financial independence or other kind of independence undertaken on a journey or academic achievement or sexuality. Whereas this has so much in it, financial pressure that forces parents to make demands of their children, family pressures and expectations, the pressure to be ordinary. And it feels to me like it's really about creativity and magic, and maybe creativity and magic are the essence of childhood. So I would love to hear more about that and what you hoped your readers would take from that story or learn from that story.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for saying nice things about Masquerade Season. I feel really tenderly for that character. Um, let's see. With Masquerade Season, I think I was thinking a lot about the tension between what we owe ourselves versus what we owe family. And there's never a straightforward answer. In fact, I went to an event at a school at a university, and somebody in the audience who was from another West African country had raised his hand and said, these are, as a man in my family, these are things I'm also thinking about, just how much of myself do I give to the people who are around me, because there is duty and there is responsibility, but also I want to be an artist. I have my own life. I want to be able to commit myself to my pursuits. And so what's the answer? I said, there's no answer. This is why I write short stories, because I don't have an answer. So the idea is to explore something, within that constraints that we just talked about. And I am hesitant to put a lesson or a takeaway, because I'm always so surprised by what people take away from every story. So my part, I really do. I'm one of those people who believes that a story doesn't end in the hand of the writer, but it ends in the imagination of the reader. So it always changes so drastically from person to person what they take away from it. But with Masquerade Season, I really, as a writer, enjoyed writing the magic of this masquerade. I enjoyed describing them. I enjoyed this tender relationship that I forget his name now. Wow, that the character has.
Is it Paul?
Polly. Yeah. Um, this tender relationship between Polly and his masquerade, and the idea of ownership, because they say that he owns them. He's like, we are yours, but at the end, well, I don't want to spoil it, but how much of that is actually true? Even if you're tying that to creativity, like how much hold do we as creatives actually have over our ideas? That's I think an interesting question to explore.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll ask a question about breast milk then. I think breast milk is such an important story. And I think if new parents read it, they'd be able to cope a lot better with the intense emotion and circumstances of either not being able to breastfeed when there's substantial pressure to do so, or to breastfeed when there's substantial pressure not to do so. And I really hope to be able to invite new parents to read your story as part of my wider research project to support breastfeeding and to support not breastfeeding through telling multiple stories. I think the story conveys so much about breastfeeding and early parenthood, the physical impact, the psychological impact, the medicalization and dehumanization process of medical intervention, the technologies involved, and also something that you didn't read from the story, which comes towards the end, the kind of wonder and joy of succeeding to feed your baby, but also the societal expectations that create such barriers. And I really found it fascinating to think about the silences. So in the parts of the story that you read, you talked about, or you read from that moment where the mother didn't have to answer because she was allowed to be silent by the process, and that time when she was also allowed to excuse herself and separate herself, those moments when that can happen as well. But also the fact that a breastfeeding woman is more than just a breastfeeding woman. The rest of her life is in that story as well. Her relationships, her work, everything else, all that still exists and doesn't disappear when a baby arrives. And I really think breast milk, your story, is unique among a lot of writing about breastfeeding, in that it brings together all of those things in such a small, short space of the short story, and that's why I think it's so important. And so I wondered whether you felt like you wanted to tell a different version of breastfeeding with the story.
Oh, I'm glad you think you saw all of these in the story. I think, like I said before, the original idea came from that lecture that Ruth Behar gave, talking about. And I mean, it's breast milk. Like, all of these symbolisms that you are talking about are just inherent, because, it's this thing that connects mother to child, but it's also this thing that is expected of you. And then there are all these conditions around how you're supposed to do it, how long you're supposed to do it. And I haven't had a child. I haven't had to breastfeed any child, but I did a lot of research that involved talking to my sister, talking to my friends who have gone through that experience. And it was a little bit heartbreaking hearing some of the stories that they told. I remember a friend in specific talking about, just almost similarly to what is described at the end of the story, the excerpt I read, when the auntie is trying to help her, like physically coerce breast milk out of her, was just being in the hospital and being acted upon as if she didn't have any agency. It was just, she was this vessel that had brought the body in a way that she's not aware that it's being expressed. And what's been wonderful is that ever since that story got published, whenever it got published so many years ago, is that I've gotten so many emails and messages from women who have had this experience, just talking about how seen they felt by it. And as somebody who wasn't on the inside of this experience, that made me feel so warm-hearted, because, there's just, again, with a lot of things that surround women and surround like reproduction and surround like childbirth, there's so much that is kept quiet. And so by writing this story, I entered that circle, and I was glad to be welcomed, and for them to share all of these experiences with me.
I wanted to ask about a theme that seems to run through all of the stories in Ghostroots, of finance, money, or economics. It seems to run through every story in some way, and it's obviously most arresting and obvious in Contributions, which you read. And I think probably because that story is so short and so directly concerned with money, maybe that's what made me feel like I couldn't ignore that theme. Like, it was a theme that, it was almost like that short story wanted to draw attention to that same theme in all the other short stories, or at least that's how I read it. So I wondered whether it's a theme that you wanted to address directly with your collection, or whether it's just an inevitable part of being a contemporary writer, that money and economics would be a theme that comes into everything.
Yes, I mean, yes, you're right. It's the second. It's that it feels inevitable or unavoidable to end up talking about like money and economics, especially in Lagos. I grew up in Lagos. It's a very strange city. We talk a lot about how the slums are right next door to the palaces, and so there's just this jumble of like class, and everything seems to be about money, or the pursuit of money, or the lack of it, or something. And I was interested in how these issues are expressed in like the intimate domestic setting. So in one way, we are talking about just the contributions that women give in their own households, right? They are the ones who a lot of times who do the cleaning and the cooking and they give birth to the children and take care of the children and take care of their husbands. So those are their contributions, right? But then I wanted to write about this money cooperative and to, like, when you put those things together, the economics of just like money, but also the economics of physical contributions, how is this then expressed in a woman's like physical body, which is why the story kind of goes in the direction it did. But what's interesting about that story is that sometimes I consider myself an intuitive writer in the sense that I don't necessarily know what I'm writing about until I have written it. And so when I started to write this story, I didn't necessarily realize that I was, even though I entered the story knowing I was writing about some kind of economics, but I didn't know I was writing about physicality, just about the weight of being, until I went back to the early versions and noticed that I had been paying particular attention to just bodies and the way that they were being seen. And there was a little girl who was walking as if her feet were made of paper, or the cat who was able to jump out of reach. So the ways that they are on these women, this collective, and their all want for a lightness is expressed in this way, and then how that ties in with contributions. Because the truth is, when you have a lot, then that's also its own kind of weight on you.
Mm. Moving from the stories themselves to the book as an object, it's published with different book covers in the UK, the US and Nigeria, and I just wondered whether you were involved much in the cover design and whether you have a favourite cover design.
I do have a favorite cover design, but I think I'm not allowed to say.
Oh.
But yes, I was involved to an extent. I think perhaps I was most involved in the US cover design. With the Nigerian one, I was clear about what I didn't want. And with the UK one, my involvement was maybe from more of a graphic design. I was talking about colors and, I have suggestions about layering. I really like the blur on that goes on the Ghostroots, and that was something I had suggested. So yes, I think book covers are very important to me. I am visual that way, and I'm grateful that my editors and publishers listened to me. Yeah.
Mm. As maybe a final big question, could you tell us any more about your writing life, your future plans, or maybe something about your forthcoming novel?
Okay, I can do two of that. Let's see. My writing life, that feels too broad because I think that I don't separate it from my real life. I feel like I'm always writing in some way, and even if that's not actually putting words on paper, it's about the way I am engaging with the world. Everything filters in somehow. I'm walking through the world just thinking, and all that thinking somehow ends up being in the writing. So I don't separate my writing life from my real life, whatever the order of that is. I can talk a little bit about the novel, which is supposed to come out next year from the same publishers. We have a title that I don't know if I'm allowed to share yet. We just decided on it. But in summary, it's about a young woman who moves to Lagos, becomes pregnant, and in the world of this story, strange things are happening with pregnant women. And so it becomes a question about how much she wants to belong to the city, how much she wants to belong to this woman. And then in the background of that, it's set in an architecture firm. She works as an intern in an architecture firm. And so there are also these questions about the city itself, about urban design, and, who belongs to a city, I think, is one of the primary questions of the novel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, can't wait to read it. Well, thank you so much. This has just been fascinating and such a wonderful opportunity to hear you reading your work, talking about your work. Thank you for being so open and sharing your ideas and your inspiration for your stories. It's been really lovely to meet you, and thank you again so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for having me. This was wonderful.